Before you all view this video, I'd like to put a little disclaimer out and say I enjoyed this novel immensely, and these are my criticisms for this review, and not an actual representation of how well it was done, actually. Hello world, welcome to my first book review. Today I will be reviewing a book called L.A.I.R from the website Wattpad that I mentioned before. My first book review, so bear with me. And I'm sure you noticed my uniform here. The username of the author is called a-dora-ble, and I'll leave a link in the description if you want to check out this book, which I implore you to do so. So today I am presented in a uniform for my karate. I am a black belt, and this has a little stigma in the story that I'd like to correct, because the main character is a black belt, and it's just a nonchalant little mention of it. Most people who are part of an art tend to take it very seriously. Those who have partaken in it know that it takes a lot of time to achieve a black belt or anything. Most of those people who do so don't tend to talk about it often or even think about it often, like as I do. I barely even imagine talking about it as I am now. But for this video I will do so. Black belts carry themselves differently than your average wannabe gang member or whoever can hold a bat and fight with it, since they have been training with said tools or their body. They know how to carry themselves in a fight. So those who are actually good at fighting are those who practice it. And black belts don't necessarily practice fighting, they practice defending themselves. So those who expect to win are those who have been practicing in actual fights and promptly to the death if they're good at it. So your average gang member who has been in many fights and are notorious for killing others could possibly be much more adequate in a battle between a black belt who's never fought for their lives before. So that I like to point that out for this novel, who pits a black belt against a gang member, you could say, who seems to do this for a living in book context. I'd like to point that out before we start this video, and that's the end of this segment. I'll be changing in just a snap. So one last comment before I move on. This means I have the ability to defend myself and nothing more. I don't have the power to make anyone lame, maim them, or any other measure of dealing damage to their body. I only seek to defend myself, nothing more. So before I get into L.A.I.R, which happens to be an action novel, and although it's not completed, it's very well along the way if you want to check it out. I want to explain a little bit about Wattpad if you haven't heard of it. Wattpad is a website for infantile authors, with the majority being young and inexperienced. Wattpad is a sort of an incubator for such writers and a place to learn and grow. I encourage you listeners to take a look at this website, since I believe it will be productive for you, especially those who I'm about to review now, which is L.A.I.R from a-dora-ble. Our first thoughts were to be conservative, as Wattpad generally don't always hold the same standards as indie publishers or any sort of publisher. But I was pleasantly surprised with the submission. It was verbose and articulate, a story after my own heart. It happens to be a favorite writing style of mine to use, which entails Shakespeare-like detail and Greek epic poem explanation. Many stories on Wattpad center on younger compatriots, as many tend to empathize easily with them. Wattpad is full of adolescents, But that is not to discount them. Many are proud and accomplished writers in their own right. The story starts out in medias res, which means in the middle of the action, where the four main characters, Orion, Zara, Saffron, and Aurora, are all about to make a particular heist. Now, these are four individuals that are all students at a school and all have individual skills that are necessary to pull off such a heist, which included stealing a very valuable ring, and that ring would be costing around $3 million about. While the author doesn't go into the particulars of the heist, she does explain the inner workings of this group of individuals, and they don't work as cohesively as this heist would have required, to my knowledge. Since they were stealing a $3 million ring, they would have needed extensive knowledge of blueprints, they would have needed extensive knowledge of the particular devices used to hide or protect it, and all the alarms and how to disable them. And for children who are my age, I doubt many of them would have the knowledge possessed within themselves to pull this off and get away with it. Since these four depend on each other and know all the particular facets of a crime, they work together to be able to live in their homes. For the main character, Zara, who was a black belt I mentioned earlier, they require these funds to pay for their living expenses in the city, which happens to be the bad part of town. These four teenagers who know each other from school happened to decide, let's have a heist. May not say that this is unlikely for the reason of collecting a group of individuals who all are similar minded, because it's very common for people who are of a similar type to find each other, and it almost works in wondrous ways. But the fact that all these people have the facets and the knowledge, training, and ingenuity to pull off such a heist, where they would have to bypass alarms, guards, and numerous other obstacles to pull off such a crime, it is unlikely for me. I would like to know what you guys think in the comments. Please comment if you think for or against, is this possible or not? Since I am questioning myself on this, since I do believe people are fated to meet each other and work together, I believe it's actually commonplace that people will find each other who are of the same mind. But do you believe that at such a young age, around 17 let's say, and they have the specialties needed to pull off a crime, do you believe that it's possible? For the next segment, I do not want to go too much deeper into the novel, since I want you guys to be able to read this with an open mind. I do want to point out one other major character who will be showing up in the next chapter or so, after what I mentioned, is one Maximiliano Rubar, who is a son of the owner of Rubar Enterprises, head honcho of the pharmaceutical world. Now, this character is a pompous hardhead who shows up inevitably in the type of story on Wattpad. Maximiliano Rubar is sent to kill Zara as the Rubar Enterprises hitman, which I find a bit odd since he is the son of the head of the company. But, to gloss over the fact, he brawls with this black belt, and since he seems to have done this many times, he is able to overpower her but then plays a facade to lull her into a sense of comfort. What this does is sets him up to have two sides to him later on, but I find this very odd since the hostilities, which were mentioned seconds before, had just ceased and Maximiano was grievously injured on the head, which likely should have killed him due to the circumstances, which I'll let you read. But to go over that fact, Maximiano and Zara strike a pact to lay off of each other until later. The story becomes very highly articulate and well developed later on, and I believe that all this characterization becomes stronger after the initial few chapters. I find the characters very interesting as they develop along these occurrences, with Zara being the main character and interacting with different people and becoming a different person in the process. So this novel starts off with a little bit of unbelievability, which all fiction does. So do not discount this book from this criticism that I've had for it. This book is very strong and I believe is very well written. I enjoyed it so much, in fact, that I'm going to read a passage from here on in.
Max stood motionlessly on the side of the road, his body frigid while his head mechanically turned from left to right, his eyes impassively scanning the passing vehicles. His hands remained in his pockets, a thumb subconsciously stroking the blank screen of his phone as he awaited for the much-expected buzzing of an incoming call. It was past 4 in the morning, and his ride still hadn't bothered to show up despite the fact he had called for it a little more than a half an hour ago. Could my father's employees be any more useless? The nocturnal Arctic breeze enveloped Max, nipping at the parts of his flesh that weren't covered by his t-shirt and leaving those behind goose bumps across his arms and neck, quickly propagating themselves to the rest of his body like seismic waves in an earthquake. A deep shudder soon followed the initial tremors. He tilted his head back, his hands clenching into fists as he dug them deeper into his pockets. After he recomposed himself, he lifted his wrist to his gaze, with intent to check the time. Then he remembered that he had left his Rolex back at the apartment, so that it wouldn't get in the way of attacking his target. One thing led to another, and his thoughts had focused themselves onto the one person he'd never thought he'd give a damn about, Zara. Her image kept creeping onto the foreground of his mind, invading and vaporizing the more important thoughts that had already taken residence within it. Like the plague, there was nothing he could do to vanquish it, as it continued to return, stronger and more vibrant with every blow. His loitering didn't help his situation either, as externally there was nothing eye-catching other than dilapidated buildings that sucked the patience out of him with every passing second. He couldn't understand why she had left such an impression on him. In all honesty, she wasn't the type of girl he'd spend time thinking about. Yes, they shared a few classes like English and chemistry, and he'd seen her a few times around the school, but she was just like a wallflower. There was absolutely nothing that made her stand out from the others. She didn't participate too much in class. She blended amongst the rows, lockers, in the hallways, and in the cafeteria she was almost invisible. She didn't fit into any cliques either. She wasn't smart enough to belong amongst the nerds, or wasn't popular enough to belong to the cheerleaders, and so on and so forth. Her head was so far up in class she didn't even know who he was. He, of all people. Maximilian Reber, one of the richest men in New York City, an entire empire a breath away. She was everything he didn't want, so why did the thought of her harass him so? Hey, you! A voice tore him out of his thoughts. Max slowly turned his head towards the disturbance. 4 figures rose from the shadows, materializing into 4 men with buzz cuts. Max immediately associated the voice with the guy in the middle, who walked ahead of the others with an air of confidence about him. He had several drawings tattooed across his face and neck, then piercings that marred his features. The ones around him closely followed his steps like lost puppies, careful to maintain a respectful distance between themselves and their leader. A gang. This should be fun. Max twisted his torso from left to right, feigning stupidity. Who, me? He asked, knowing very well that there was no one else besides him on that street. The man easily swallowed Max's hook, line, and sinker, as expected. We caught a big one, guys, he sneered, turning toward his companions. They forcibly laughed at what was supposed to be a joke, flanking him when he stopped a meter away from Max. I'm sorry, am I missing something? Max inquired sarcastically, wanting an excuse to beat the plebe's face into a pulp. Yes, you are. What are you doing in our territory? Your territory? I didn't see your piss anywhere, Max countered, a smirk on his face. The man's eyes widened to golf balls, and the other guys took a step towards Max. What did you say to me, punk? He pulled out his switch knife from his pocket, flicking the blade into view as he walked until he was just a few centimeters away from Max. The others also pulled out their toys. The dumbass was considerably shorter than Max, about a head, so he had to tilt his head back to look up at him. Max was a moment away from laughing in his face at how pathetic he was being, thinking that a bunch of pocket knives would be any threat to him, but he decided to continue playing. I thought dogs were supposed to be smart animals, Max sighed, shaking his head. The three musketeers immediately took offense for the leader and lunged at him, but the boss stopped him with an arm. I suggest you keep your poodles on a leash, big guy. They might get hurt. The kid from the back veered around Mr. Tattoo Face, threw himself at Max, a hand with a bat raised over his head. Max took a few steps backward into a fighting stance, giving his attacker enough time to make his way towards him. Just when he was about to swing, Max used his forearm to deflect the action, pulling his fist back and smashing into the kid's jaw. He stumbled backwards, dazed, but returned a flurry of limbs, determination taking the better part of his sanity. This was the cue for the others to begin their advancements. The other two minions approached Max from his right, while their leader came galloping towards him in the middle. The gangster on the far right tried to swing his fist at Max, while the other attempted to jab his victim in the gut. Max ducked, missed the swing, and used his weight to forcibly elbow the guy in the ribs. Then, after he straightened, he swung an uppercut to the man's chin. The first game screaming at him again, but Max immediately disarmed him and kneed him in the gut, using his elbow again to slam him into the ground. Suddenly, Max felt a hit on his left shoulder and he stumbled forward, roaring in pain and anger. Max swiveled to see the leader with a sly grin on his face. He wore knuckle dusters on both hands, which were curled into fists and brought up to his face, boxer style. The guy lunged at Max, his fist flying towards him, but Max moved out of the path, feeling a brush against his ear. Max grabbed his forearm with both hands, turning around, and stepped away from him, pulling over his shoulder and flipping him onto his back. The leader landed with a thud on the ground, and Max KO'd him with a strike to the face. He trudged towards the others. One of them was lying face on the ground, while the other one was trying to escape the scene. No survivors. Max took 2 long strides toward him, then grabbed him by the collar and pulled him towards him. With a punch, he knocked him out permanently. Then he walked towards the guy coughing against the wall, Max's eyes green with venom. Please, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to. He didn't finish this sentence as Max swiped the knife across his jugular, leaving him gurgling and gasping for air. Max was about to end the last guy as well, but had to first find out whether their appearance had been staged or simply coincidence. He crouched down and flipped the guy over onto his back, lifting him up by the collar. His head lolled onto one side, as he was on the verge of unconsciousness, but Max used his other hand to turn his bruised jaw towards him. Under the bruises and tattoos, the kid wasn't older than 16, 17, 18 at the most. Max almost felt pity for him, but he couldn't let him live, not unless he wanted to be reported to a possible enemy. So, that's as far as I'm going to be reading. Hope you guys enjoyed this, and please click the link in the description if you want to read the entire novel. Have a good one.